Athletic Therapy Ontario salutes Concussion Week 2023 with an interview with the Ontario MPP who led the political efforts that resulted in the creation of Rowan's Law to address concussion in sport. The Ontario MPP was Lisa Macleod. Her riding is Nepean. She worked with Rowan Stringer's parents, family, and friends in what remains first of its kind in Canada legislative and concussion health policy framework in Canada. One of the first healthcare professionals who stood with Macleod was Ontario athletic therapist. Rowan Stringer died in May 2013. This is 2023. Concussion Week marks the 10th anniversary of that tragic death. Rowan's Law came into force and effect in September 2016. Join us in welcoming MPP Lisa Macleod to the Ontario Athletic Therapists Association's podcast, Health in Motion. Lisa Macleod, your response to the tragic death of a 17-year-old female rugby player resulted in a remarkable advances in terms of concussion awareness, concussion guidelines, and treatment protocols. When you and Rowan's parents, Gordon and Kathleen, first joined forces to try to make sense of the tragedy of her death on a rugby field, did you think the impact of those actions would be what they are today?
I think that's an excellent question. First, I have to say thank you very much for having me on. Last May would have been 10 years since Rowan passed, and of course, it's been several years now since we've established Rowan's Law Day because of the legislation that Ontario, the first and only jurisdiction in Canada, has brought forward in terms of concussion legislation. It wouldn't have been done without the bravery and the courageous beliefs of Kathleen and Gord Stringer, who really could have spent the rest of their lives, rightfully so, mourning the loss of their child. But they stepped into high gear and demanding answers. They wanted change, and they wanted to say to the world, you know, my daughter, our daughter, who, you know, aspired to be a nurse and work at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, never got that chance because she had a preventable death. She sustained multiple concussions during a very short period of time. And as a result of that, she died from second impact syndrome. And so they came to see me. I've been very open with some of my mental health challenges. I think Gordon and Kathleen knew I might have been able to walk out the door that day as well. And it was this convergence and the serendipity nature of the three of us meeting in my office where I'd taken if you can believe it, I'd taken all the wall hangings off because it was just, I was in a very, very difficult state. And it gave me, through them, a sense of purpose. And that sense of purpose did something incredible at the legislature. Not only restored my faith in public service at that time, but also showed me and demonstrated the very meaningful way you can work with other members of political parties, such as Catherine Fife from the New Democrats and John Fraser in the Liberal Party, to bring forward a piece of legislation that will have impact on other people's lives, while at the same time making a real difference in the way we create policy in Ontario. We now have parents from across Ontario texting me or emailing me the day they get the form that says they're adhering to Rowan's Law for their kids' lacrosse team or hockey team or basketball team. And so it took something that was quite significant in my community of Nepean to the floor of the legislature, now across to every community in this province and every school in Ontario.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into my second question. The OETA was moved to stand with you during the early days of that call to action, in part as a result of the fierce passion you demonstrated that this death would not pass as a statistic or a tragedy, but would serve as a game changer within sports medicine. Did you think you would be able to get full Queen's Park support for what became Rowan's Law from all the political sides of the Ontario legislature? And then sort of an add-on to that, why do you think that happened?
Well, so first of all, I want to say thanks to the OATA. And as you know, from the early days of this, it started out as a petition campaign because of the inquest that was held into Rowan's death. There was no way to take the very tangible, real recommendations and turn them into law or policies. That work required the legislature to get to act and to get to act fast. And so we created two teams. We called it the Nepean Rowan's Law team, which was really led by Kathleen and Gord, as well as a number of people from our sports community in Ottawa and some of our school board peoples. And what I loved about that is Rowan's rugby squad, the Barhaven Scottish Rugby Club, they were prominent in that team. And then we had the Toronto team. It was athletic therapists, it was school boards, it was sports organizations, it was people who were studying concussion, it was people that were treating concussion. So we had a lot of physicians. And when you start to build a team, both in the nation's capital, where at the time there were several cabinet ministers, and then you build a team throughout Ontario with people leveraging their networks, it became unstoppable. And it became such a nonpartisan thing that it wasn't about liberal, conservative, New Democrat. It was about, oh my God, a child in Ontario died and it was preventable. Rowan Stringer did not have to die had, her coaches, her managers, her teammates, spectators, herself been aware of what the damage of a concussion can do. So today in Ontario, I don't think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think today when somebody gets a diagnosis of concussion, they view it very seriously. Prior to Rowan's Law, I think people who had a concussion after they had one and diagnosed, they would be like, okay, I have this, but they didn't get the attention they deserved because you couldn't see it. Very much like at mental illness or Alzheimer's or anything with your brain, if you can't see it, does it really exist? And I think today we've opened a lot of windows and a lot of doors so that people can see in and understand this. So it was incredible. And I really do thank you guys for your early adoption of how important this was.
Yeah. And I think it was important that there was people on the ground helping with this. It just didn't come from physicians. It just didn't come from politicians. It came from people that are there day in and day out, seeing these kids getting hurt. So and your position is quite correct. It's gone from like a nudge, wink, wink kind of, I may have been concussed, to I think I've been concussed. I don't think I should play. And that's been a huge step, that I've seen in over my 30 years of being involved in hockey. So that has been elemental in its change in the recognition and understanding that a concussion is a bad thing. So
well, it is. And Eric Lindros always would say, and I haven't talked to Eric recently, but when we were doing these in the early days, his star power brought a lot of clout too, right? Because sometimes it's politics or it's in the field, but he gave us sort of a national, international voice because of his ability. But he would always say, is this soccer game, is this ringette game really the game you want to play if you've got a concussion, because it might be your last? And a 13 or 14-year-old kid in their mind may think this is going to be the most important game of my life, but it could be the last game of their life. And yeah. I think we were able to start to draw that picture for many people.
Yeah. Why do you think Ontario remains the only province in Canada with this concussion legislation in place?
It shocks me. I grew up in Nova Scotia, as many people know, and I've seen Sidney Crosby with a number of concussions. And there was just after Rowan Stringer had passed away, there was another young man in Nova Scotia who had gotten a severe concussion. I'm not sure what the status is now, but it was very, very difficult. And I always thought that would be a problem that would naturally follow through, and they haven't. And I had the opportunity after this law passed to be sport minister for 3 years. And each time I met with the sport ministers across Ontario, really advocated for a national policy. Ken Dryden, when he was still in the House of Commons, also advocated for a national strategy. Just seems to go nowhere, and I don't understand. Is there a level of protection that they think they're providing sports organizations? Is the medical community there not as adamant as making sure that there are protections? I'm not quite sure. We had the right dynamics at the right time, drawing from a very significant tragedy. But there was political will, and there was political will to tell some of these big sports organizations, you have to adhere to this. And when we hosted the Canada Games, Ontario was the most safe Canada Games in the history of the country, because everyone had to adhere to our safety concussion rules and protocols.
Yep. So, this concussion week, Athletic Therapy Ontario has been involved with numerous organizations, all advancing concussion research, concussion education, and new concussion treatment guidelines and protocols. The advances in knowledge and understanding of concussion that have resulted from Rowan's Law and the concussion policy working groups is remarkable. However, all admit that there's not enough data. Underreporting of concussions is acknowledged by all, and while athletic therapists are on the front line of concussion care as trained first responders and point of injury experts, the push is to enlist volunteer parents and others to learn how to identify signs of a concussion that should result in a young athlete being pulled from the game. How can Ontario move the needle further on best in kind point of injury concussion care?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, technology probably could have a role to play as we start to see more technology advance and evolve. Perhaps that's something we should work with Coaches Ontario. But of course, as you and I both know, this isn't just about sports. It could be easily a veteran who's come back from Afghanistan, who actually sustained a concussion and was misdiagnosed as PTSD. We're starting to see that now with the Concussion Legacy Foundation. They're starting to do that studying. We know women, for example, there's underreporting of concussions in women because most of the studies and the data that we've got so far focuses around men. And I know also the Concussion Legacy Foundation is doing a lot of work with their brain bank. So these are some challenges. And then the other issue on underreporting, and I think you and I both know this, is sometimes a child doesn't know what it is, or a parent said, I paid for this entire weekend to go to play in a hockey tournament in Kingston, and my kid's playing every game, and they don't recognize the real challenges that poses because the kid's not coming off with a cast. And so I think that there's going to be always some human error on this, but I think too, the one thing we're doing a lot of is focusing on youth sport, which is what I intended at the beginning of this. But now as I get into this a little bit more, and you probably do too, there are other challenges. So I would say if there was some way or shape or form that we could actually come to some level of an agreement on some type of technology that practitioners would also be part of, because that would be significant. Because again, I just listed off 3 others, but you and I both know people could be in a car accident, they can fall and slip on the ice, and they may present not to you, but to the emergency room, or not at all.
Yeah. What do you think could be done to act on the coroner's recommendation, which was recommendation 38, I believe, that there should be an athletic therapist present at every youth sport practice and game?
Yeah, that would be ideal. I think we both know, but it's probably not as practical as the recommendation points out. So I think what would be good is coaches, maybe Canada, some of the provincial sport organizations, and I'm not sure how many there are now, but there were about 62 when last time I was minister, and then athletic therapists working together on a type of protocol where perhaps there's modules where you actually train people, or that they actually have somebody that supports it. But we have so many challenges in the healthcare system as it is, so that's a tough one, but ideal. It's an ideal thing, but it's also probably a difficult one. And I can say, as being a trainer for many years in my daughter's hockey club. The thing I was most worried about, I didn't like when a kid got a broken ankle, or they hurt their hand and sprained their wrist, but it was the head injury that just made me just cringe, because although it's unlikely that their concussion would end in death, but it is possible. I would always worry about the downstream effects like depression, the nauseousness, the missing school for a month because they can't handle the light, not being able to open their computer, these types of things. And it was always something that I worried about. And I have to say, like with my daughter playing soccer a year ago, I got on the field to see if a child had a concussion, because even the two schools that were playing didn't have somebody that was trained to understand if the child that had been hit had a concussion. Thankfully she didn't, but it just goes to show you in this recommendation that we still, despite all of our successes, have a long way to go in protecting youth athletes.
Yeah, and I think with me rejoining the Rowan's Law working group, I'd become a little bit idealistic, and then once I started working with the group again, it became very apparent the true challenges that we have in terms of just collecting data.
Yeah.
Because I know, from being a clinical practitioner, and the number of soccer concussions that we treat at my clinic compared to the reported concussions coming from soccer. And I pointed it out to the group, like, there's a huge disconnect here. And
well, we need to ban, in my opinion, heading for younger athletes, because that's where a lot of the head injuries are coming from.
Yeah, I'm starting to join your thought process about that. And there's lots of things. I'm not sure if you're aware of CNN just recently released a study. There's been a new MRI developed that's actually able to distinguish between gray and white matter, and it can actually visualize the interconnections that the white matter has to the gray matter. And it was used in a study of football players in their first year of full contact. And so there was only 1 year of contact, and they were able to show damage with that group. And that
I hadn't seen that. So
finally, Mrs. Macleod, as the first champion of concussion in sports legislation, as a former Minister of Sport in Ontario from June 2019 to June 2022, and as a tireless advocate for sound public policy, what do you think remains as a priority to advance concussion knowledge and concussion care in Ontario?
So I think treatment and protocols, diagnosis are extremely important, and I love the idea of furthering the discussion about reporting. But I think just with anything, awareness is key. And one of the things when we get the kids at the beginning of the year to sign their Rowan's Law consent form with their sport organization, they start to understand what that is. And then of course it goes to their parents, and their parents start to understand what that is. And I don't remember that. And keep in mind, when we brought in the legislation, my daughter was young and was playing hockey, and I was her hockey trainer. And then right up until a year ago, I was sport minister. So I have watched in real time, not just anecdotal evidence, but in real time, the evidence of people understanding what this is and why it's important for us to have the conversation. So I think no matter what, we're going to have to always improve on every other aspect, but we can never let up on the awareness campaign. And that's why I think Rowan's Law Day, the last Wednesday of every month, or last Wednesday of every September, is key. It's critical. We're bringing it into the schools. We have a concerted effort with organizations as well as politicians to push this forward. And then you have places, and people do ask, why is the CN Tower or Niagara Falls or the Shaw Center in Ottawa, why are they all lit up purple? Well, it's for Rowan's Law Day, and it becomes a discussion point for people, and we can't let up. We just can't, because again, one death because of a concussion is too many, especially a death of a child who had their entire future ahead of them because it was entirely preventable.
Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly. I've been in hockey for over 30 years, and the evolution that I've seen in terms of that. And I kind of chuckle to myself when we get our kids to sign the Rowan's Law form. And I guess because I've been an insider, I just know what it's all about, and then they go, well, who's Rowan?
Yeah.
So then once we can put it into perspective for them, then it actually means something when they sign it. So
Yeah.
So on behalf of the OATA and Athletic Ontario, I'd like to thank you for chiseling some time out of your busy schedule for us, and we hope to be able to help the legislation whenever called upon. So.
Yeah. Well, Drew, you guys have been amazing. I want to thank you for being with me from day one, and more importantly, for being with the Stringer family in Rowan's memory since day one. So we've done some amazing things together, and because of you and so many others, this is not going away. We are going to continue to work to save kids' lives, and we're going to work to make sure that adults get the care that they need. And so thank you so much, and I really appreciate you inviting me on here today.
Great. Thanks a lot, Lisa.
Thank you.
Yeah. The last Wednesday of every September is Rowan's Law Day. We stop to honor Rowan and her senseless death from concussion. Rowan Stringer was a 17-year-old and in grade 12 when she passed away following a concussion received during a rugby match for her high school team. A coroner's inquest into her death held in May 2013 concluded that she died from second impact syndrome and had likely suffered 2 previous concussions during the 5 days preceding the match where she suffered the fatal injury. Rowan was captain of her high school team and played for the Bearhaven Scottish Rugby Football Club. She played ringette, soccer, flag football, lacrosse, and was also a keen snowboarder. She had been accepted into Ottawa University to study to become a registered nurse. When you listen to this podcast interview, be sure it motivates you to become an advocate for better concussion care in Ontario. Ontario athletic therapists are pleased to hear from Ontario MPP Lisa Macleod during Concussion Week 2023.